Well, hello and welcome to this ONUG Spring 2023 open session. This is a session from Gluware here entitled Accelerate Network Hyperautomation. I'm Michael Howe, VP of Product Marketing, and let's jump into the content. We have a lot to get through. So from an agenda standpoint, I want to make the majority of the session focused on demonstrating the capability in our product. So we're going to get through a couple quick slides to give you a brief introduction of the Gluware Intelligent Automation Platform, just so you have a awareness before we jump in and start, hopping through applications and you have some context. We're also going to talk about hyperautomation and what is it, and more specifically how Gluware plays in terms of accelerating the ability to achieve it, especially when it comes to your network or your infrastructure automation. So the meat of the material here is around our no-code app suite and the ability to move from, let's say, task or lower level automation to process automation. So we're going to cover that in 3 phases. In phase 1, it's going to be around network and device discovery. In phase 2, around assessment and audit of the network. And then phase 3, implementing standard configs and remediation. So let's go ahead and move on here. So the one pager here to introduce you to the Gluware Intelligent Automation Platform is that Gluware is a pure software solution. It installs on compute in your environment. It's architected to be very scalable, where you can install your primary orchestration engine in one place and you can install zone engine servers and others. So it's, again, highly scalable. We have deployments of 50,000, supporting 50,000 devices and going well beyond that this year. So being a pure software solution, the way you access the app and the solutions is through a web-based UI called Gluware Control. And within that web-based UI, you have access to a suite of applications. So these are our so-called no-code suite. You don't have to have any coding experience to jump in and work with them. So each of these apps are kind of purpose-built, right? So in device managers, where you first onboard your devices and you can perform a network discovery and you can begin to assess the devices via various ways. We'll look at that, and so on and so forth, right? So you have a suite of applications that enable you to begin automating what we call out of the box, meaning there's very little time required to begin automating many functions. As you are well aware, and you'll see as you move on into auditing or config management, you're going to want to bring in your policies and your configurations and things like that. So there is a bit of obviously configuration and customization required. However, you have the ability to do that with completely a no-code experience. So we're going to go through the majority of the apps on our app suite in the demo, but all of the applications are driven by our intelligent orchestration engine. And again, not going to deep dive here, but just know that it's a data model driven platform. This is where a lot of the intelligence is built in. This engine enables us to be declarative. So you can do things like put in an intended state of configuration and the engine will make it happen. You can put in an intended software upgrade, and Gluware will take all the steps to execute that upgrade in a closed loop fashion and perform validation. So that's really where the intelligence of the system, but also the uniformity it brings to a multi-vendor, multi-domain network. So it doesn't matter if you're automating LAN or WAN or SD-WAN or a software-defined data center. The experience automating with Gluware is consistent because we're ingesting those technologies and then presenting them to you within our application suite. So we are automating CLI infrastructure, which is kind of your traditional network devices, API-driven infrastructure, which is more like your SD-WAN controller, or think of Cisco ACI or Meraki, those sorts of technologies. And we do automate the APIs on the cloud side. APIs is a big conversation. We also do a lot of integration with really any API through our process automation, and then have other API integrations you'll see, like with Cisco Support API and NIST. Beyond the no-code software suite and what we deliver out of the box, we also have Gluware Lab. Gluware Lab is a platform of low code where you work in JSON data modeling and JavaScript business logic. It's a low code experience to add really pretty powerful customization, abstraction, API integration, and others. And so that environment is open to our customers to add that level of customization the more complex enterprises need. So moving on, what is this hyper automation thing? I mean, I'm in marketing, or I serve and help marketing in my product management role. And marketing, let's call it what it is. I mean, it is a bit of a buzzword, but in my take on it, it is important in terms of why it's evolved to this level. And we can credit Gartner and IBM and others that are putting out quite a bit of material on it. But one of the main things hyper automation, this movement, is doing is driving the awareness up to the executive staff. And once you get the awareness of the executive staff, they start becoming more educated, asking more questions, getting more involved in funding the projects to actually make it happen from a process and a technology side. So when you look through the various definitions of it, again, Gartner has a lot of material on it. There's several key components that are pretty consistent. One is the use of advanced technologies. And so one of the myths or misnomers about hyperautomation is it's like one specific technology, like it is AI. I see a typo on my slide here. It's supposed to be AI ML, that it is AI driven. And it doesn't necessarily have to be. It's basically you're evolving to use the best technology to deliver the solution. Another technology that has been evolving and is becoming used across a lot of areas is process automation. So we're going to be talking about that in regards to process automation for your network infrastructure. But there are RPA solutions for business processes, and now there's network RPA, what Gluware offers, in process automation around the infrastructure. No code and low code is oftentimes called out because I think what slows down a lot of people in automation is diving into the coding. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, but it's important to have technologies that enable automation capabilities without coding experience. That's a no-code side. And from a low-code side, being able to jump into some things that are code-like maybe data modeling or other lower abstracts and constructs that look like code, but aren't necessarily full-blown programming. You don't have to be a deep computer scientist to jump in and get some stuff done. So that's one of the first things to cover, is that definitely it encompasses advanced technologies, but it isn't one specific thing. The next thing to move on to, again, very important when it comes to hyperautomation, is it's the integration of tools and technologies. So when I look at the people, process, technology, this is a bit more on the process side, because you're going to have different tools teams within your organizations. You have monitoring products, you have ITSMs and sources of truth, and you're going to want to be able to integrate your tools and technologies. Normally these days that is accomplished through API integrations, but there are other methods where some tools have pre-built-in integrations. Other tools allow you to build those in a lightweight manner. Others, there's allow you to ingest or have capabilities. So again, all kinds of ways to do it, but it is the integrations of the tools and technologies so you can actually automate the end-to-end business level process. Next bullet here is, again, at the hyper automation level, again, Gartner, IBM, others, it really applies to a wide range of business functions. Most of us in the context of ONUG are talking about the network infrastructure, or cloud, and it's not what it is limited to. Hyperautomation applies to many business functions, including business processes, marketing, customer service, but it does, of course, apply to IT operations and infrastructure. So that's the piece that we're going to dive into more. And then I think one of the most important pieces, and I was starting this in the intro of it, is that hyperautomation begins generally with a top-down agenda. Most people in the roles and functions aren't going to change the way they're doing things unless they're asked to or told to from top down, and what those business objectives are and what the goals are for that quarter and that year. So this is really where there should be a fundamental shift in organizations, where it should be a top-down directed thing, where there's time allocated, there's resources, and there's priority on these projects. It also has to be cross-functional. And I think these bullets get into that people dynamic, because oftentimes we go in and try to help organizations automate, and operations, their objective is to keep the network up and running. And then you have the engineering team, which wants to roll out new capabilities and services. And the two have kind of competing priorities. You have, one is uptime and stability, and the other is get the new technology out and deployed. And so you need to have like a cross-functional unification. A lot of organizations tend to bring silos together and kind of align them and align goals so they're meeting there. So that's just like a little bit of a high-level context of what hyperautomation is in the big picture. But as we start to look towards, the technology and how we do this, and again, it helps in process and people as well, but Gluware is going to focus a bit more on how we help you automate in your network infrastructure. So what is the current approach? And I think that this is where if you get senior folks involved and they start coming in and saying, well, everyone can agree automation is important, but how are we doing the automation and how long does it take to build? And what is the process in terms of supporting that automation? And does everyone have access to that automation? And what you find is a high percent of tasks are still done manually, but the things that are automated are typically automated via some low level, we call it DIY, do it yourself, where you're taking on Python and Ansible, and it is skill set heavy because it requires some level of programming skill or a combination of a lot of technology to get automation working. But also what it achieves typically is very low level task-based automation. So you are automating, but you're automating at a low level task and you're still doing a lot of manual in between. So the DIY approach is not really moving the bar within these organizations. Next, and the next kind of two buckets we're seeing some approaches where you begin to bring in workflow automation, but the workflows, while they do provide, let's say, an end-to-end process, the workflows are actually automating, script task here, then a next script task here. And so you're not really gaining all the benefits you would hope. You do have the ability to stitch things together and begin to get towards process automation. But if all the pieces you're stitching together are still low-level scripts and are kind of, let's say the term is brittle, where they are not really built to deal with a lot of situations and have to be maintained. And there's just a lot of challenges in that area. You're going to see, not going to see, again, significant change within organizations. And then in this last bucket here, the majority of hardware vendors out there provide some level of tooling for automation, maybe for monitoring that has some automation and others. And what you're finding there is where there may be some benefit here. Many of the organizations we go into are very multi-vendor, and then you have your different domains of the network with the LAN, WAN, data center, and all these things. And you're going to have different deployments, different hardware, and you end up with kind of these very siloed tooling approaches and automation approaches. And again, in general, once you go to look at it to automate a process end to end, it's very difficult to kind of stitch these things together because many of the vendors just kind of don't play nice. So how do we accelerate past these barriers? And that's where it gets to the Gluware approach and how we help automate hyperautomation related to the network infrastructure. And that it is a large degree of it is turnkey, and you're going to see that. It's one of the key things we're showing here through packaged automation with a suite of applications. You're going to see no-code apps. We're not going to get into the low-code side. We're not jumping into the Gluware Lab or anything more complex in this demo, but knowing that you can go there is important. Gluware is multi-vendor and multi-domain, so this helps with that consolidation and automating across, or when you have Juniper and Cisco and Arista and Palo Alto and many others within that domain or within your multi-domain network. The intelligence and intent-based, this are two really critical differentiators in that a lot of automation technologies I've seen, the user has to imperatively describe the steps and let's say the logic of it. And when things are very imperative, it makes it more difficult to deal with the different situations. If the starting point is different devices have different configurations or different devices you're trying to update are on different versions to start with or have different, let's say, space available for an upgrade, Having intelligence in the platform to execute things like pre-checks and post-checks and look at the current state and be able to give you an intent-based capability where you can say the intended state of a software upgrade or a change, and it will be carried out by the automation platform. This is really where the acceleration piece comes in. A focus on this presentation we're going to get into is using Gluware's Network RPA to quickly evolve things to process automation. So anyone can give you a UI and say, here's the 12 steps to onboard a device and assess it. The problem with that is, yes, your software is doing a lot of the work for you, but there's still a lot of manual pointing and clicking and execution. So how do you move towards a process automation where once you do it once and you have the process well defined, how do you stamp and repeat it? How do you let the process automation do that for you? So this all correlates to time to value and really expanding that with your ability to support your customers in your business line. And Gluware releases 3 major releases a year generally, and then we have package releases every 2 weeks. So Gluware has this release capability to get capabilities out into the marketplace to very quickly address what's happening related to vendor support and other things. So I hope that gives you a good take on the Gluware approach and how we see things a little bit differently. Now I want to give you some context into how users use our product and how it kind of evolves within their organization. So we're going to start with the so-called out-of-the-box apps that are this, again, no code, low code. And so you're going to be kind of using these apps. There's no one set entry point because we have customers that the most important thing is doing a software upgrade or the most important thing is rolling out a config change. And so you can go right to that, but generally you're ingesting the network and then you're moving on to assessing and auditing and upgrading. Then you're really leveraging the data to understand your infrastructure, your state, use topology to generate diagrams. And then you move on into, let's say, what people would consider the more risky changes where you're implementing configuration change and doing it at scale. So that gets into our config modeling technology. Next, as you evolve in the Gluware experience, some of our users, and again, about 10% or so of our customer base, and this is increasing, let's say every quarter, are adopting Gluware Lab. So this is, let's say, an optional piece, but if you're in our product and then you see, you want custom abstractions or you want some specific API integrations, that's all possible through Gluware Lab. Next is the piece that we are going to show you. We're going to show you the progress from using an app and then moving to using the Gluware Network RPA for process automation. So this is, again, where we're evolving to doing multiple steps all in one fell swoop and making that being repeatable and reusable. Once you get into process automation, oftentimes you start to look at other external systems to integrate with. And this is key in the hyperautomation journey, is to integrate with your ITSM, integrate with your source of truth, integrate with your monitoring, be able to automate changes in your cloud environments and many more use cases. So we're not going to cover a lot of that in this intro, but just to know that that piece is available within Gluware and a very important point to evolve to. Then from a forward-looking component, Gluware is using advanced technologies. We are already data modeling and essentially doing models for all the underlying infrastructure. And this is this enables us to layer in AI, ML driven. So we're helping customers evolve from task-based automation to process automation to autonomous network functions and automation. So that's really where Gluware is helping drive our community and our user base. So let's take a look at the 3 key things that we're going to look at in this demo as soon as we jump into the UI. One is around initial assessment. So as soon as you add in devices, what are these devices on the network? What hardware, what software are they running? Do I need to look at things from Cisco like end-of-life and sale SmartNet PCert or NIST CVEs? And you can start to search and query and start to really understand what you have. In the next step, and we're going to show a use case around audit, is beginning to execute audits of the configuration. So you can use CIS-based security standard audits. You can use company policy audits, or third-party compliance if you're NIST or HIPAA or something other compliant organization you're looking to follow. You certainly can move on into automating your operating systems. We're not going to highlight that in this demo just because OS changes are fairly lengthy in terms of transferring files and executing an upgrade. So a little too long for this demo. And we'll get into policy management. How do you use Gluware's config modeling and begin to implement standard-based policies and set up a capability where you can remediate if things are taken out of policy. And then we will touch on dashboards and Data Explorer, where you can see this, visualize this data, and generate this data in custom reports. So with that, let's jump into the live demos. Okay, so here we are in the Gluware UI. I'm not going to spend a lot of time giving a tutorial of everything. I'll just actually work through the use case and you'll be able to follow along that way. So I'm logged into demo.gluware.com. This is an instance of Gluware we use for our test drive. So if you're interested, you can follow along. You can request a test drive and do a lot of this yourself in this environment. So I am navigated into a dashboard, and I'm currently showing a dashboard called My Inventory, which I just want to demonstrate that there's no devices in this org. And so I'm in the test drive pod 3. There's no devices in here right now. So in this use case, I'm going to jump over to Device Manager. In Device Manager is where we can add devices. So we can add them one by one. We can import a list. We can have them added via an API call, or we can execute a network discovery. So since my devices are in a lab, they don't, I could facilitate discovery, but I think from just the point of this use case, I'm going to start with a list of known devices and say this use case is basically around, let's say, starting with, I'll call it an M&A type of activity, but bringing new Gluware or devices into Gluware. So with that, I'm here in Device Explorer. I'm going to say import devices. Now it says drop your CSV file. If you need the format of that CSV file, you can download it right here. So I'm going to drop in this CSV, and then it's going to say it's complete, and I hit OK. So in phase 1 or step 1, all I've done is add a list of devices with connectivity information, meaning I know how to reach them. I don't have credentials or anything else. One thing I will point out is in this use case, I have kind of two fictitious locations, LA and Sacramento, indicated by the airport code that's in the name, and that will play into this. So normally I would come into Gluware, and then there's a lot of steps you could do manually. I could trigger a discovery and interrogate these devices, and then I could begin to look into that data. But what I want to show you is evolving to process automation. So to kind of fast forward the demo a little bit, we're going to jump right into Network RPA and go into the workflow library. Because instead of going through all these things step by step, I want to show you how we can take it from a step-by-step process executed manually in a UI to a much more automated process, again, accelerating you towards hyperautomation. So I have a workflow I've developed here called the initial discovery and inventory report. So something we would commonly do when we're adding new devices into management for automation. So what I want to do is go ahead and edit this workflow and show you what's in here. So this is Network RPA. You have tasks on your right, and you have your canvas here in the center, and you basically drag and drop tasks onto your workflow, and you build out exactly what you want for your process automation. So this is where we get the whole no code and drag and drop. You're just drag and dropping tasks. So starting with, I'm applying a filter because in my use case, I actually want to do something specific based on, in this case, again, a part of the name of the device. So the workflow by default will take in all devices in my inventory, and I'm going to filter it for names that contain LAX. Again, I'm using the premise here that there's two locations, and I want to first do something with the first location. So that's task number 1. Anytime you edit, you just hit apply, and then you save your changes, and then that task is configured. The next thing I'm doing is applying a configuration to those devices within the Gluware system. One of the things I want to do is set up topology to work well. So I'm going to be using a task that says configure device site. This is just configuring a device property. The property I'm editing is the site path, and I'm assigning it into the Los Angeles location. So when we go back into the device manager and we go into topology, you'll see that. The next thing I want to do is, again, another important step when importing a lot of devices and you don't want to go through editing or whatever. I am going to, for these devices here, I'm going to be adding a credential because when I imported, I didn't import with any credentials. I have a credential named Cisco. Okay, this ties to our new credential manager in 5.1, and we don't really have time to dive into it, but just know that you don't have to deal with individual device username passwords. Everything's handled through a central credential manager, and that with that you set up names, and then you can leverage the same credential across all of these devices. Next, I'm going to execute a capture. So this is actually executing what we call our device discovery, where we interrogate all the devices and ingest all the details into Gluware. You're going to see that information, including the current configurations that's on it. Next is I have a little check. And this is because, a lot of times when you're given a list of devices, they may or may not be reachable. So I have a little loop that just says, if the access status is okay, I proceed. And then there's an else condition. So let me navigate out of that. The else condition is the device is not okay. So I have just a notification email to let me know that devices were not accessible. And I'm seeing here, I have a little typo here. When you use our reserved variables, you double curly bracket them. So I'm going to just fix that real quick. So if a device was not accessible, I would receive an email saying device is not accessible. It would tell me what the workflow that ran. Actually, I'm going to put this in the subject line a little. I'm going to remove it from here. So I just want the body of the email to tell me what devices were not accessible. So that's an example of a little loop here that if you were manually doing it, you would have to go and assess and determine, well, what all devices were not accessible, and you have to do some filtering. Now it's just an automated step. And then at the end here, I have a task that is going to email me a report that already exists in our report data explorer, which is the Cisco extended inventory device list. It's going to be in CSV format. And again, it's going to email it to me and has information auto-generated in the email itself. One thing I was thinking about when I was doing this use case was, one other piece of it is, since we're just brand new adding these devices, we do need one more task. So let me cancel out of here. And that task we want to do is update support info. So after we run the capture of config, we're going to run an update support info. So this is going to reach out to the Cisco API that's already configured in the system and the NIST API, and just check for Cisco end of life, end of sale PCERT. We're going to want that populated so we have it in our detailed report. So now that we've built our workflow and you had a chance to see me edit tasks and do some drag and drop here, we're going to cancel out of that. There's no change there. The steps are: you save your workflow, you validate the workflow. A validation is an important step. It goes through all, if you're using variables and referencing those variables and all that stuff, it's checking everything, including licensing and whatever else you need checked. And now I can run a test, or I can move it to production. In this case, or I can just exit out and it's sitting in my workflow library. So I do want to run the test and hit execute. And while it's running, I'm going to go to the activity. So when a workflow is running, and again, I fired this one off manually. You can schedule them. They can be API triggered. You can be, there's various ways in which you can run them. So it's running. And while it's running, you're going to see it, the tasks execute on the right-hand side here. So it filtered, Of my 10 devices, 6 matched have LAX in the name. It is configuring device credentials. It's now executing a capture. So when Gluware is executing a capture, it is interrogating each of these devices. And I can even go to the target level and I can see these. And I know in Device Manager, you can definitely dive into the log in real time and see the action. I don't believe we're updating the logging in real time here, but you will have logs per those devices, and you can always navigate into Device Manager and see that in action. But so we're concurrently interrogating all these devices. Let me navigate back to the task view. And it updated the support info, and it completed in 1 minute. So a very quick run here. So a couple quick things. One is I will navigate back to Device Manager. And I will see that those LAX, let's say, again, fictitious location, those have now been, they're all accessible. I can see that my grid has been populated. These are iOS-based devices running 16.9.2. They are CSRs. This is a primarily VM-based virtual lab. Serial number, uptime, again, all the data captured. And as I scroll over, I see the data available from the Cisco API. So these are not under contract, don't have end of life, end of sale. They do have these Cisco bulletins that are available on the PCERT side. So some criticals, mediums, and highs. So again, just want to highlight that, this was all dynamically populated. The other thing I will bring up is this is a view where it shows my sites. So if I use the Los Angeles filter, I can see that these were appropriately allocated into the Los Angeles site. And I didn't do anything with the Sacramento site, so there's none there at this time. So there's a couple things where you can see all this was automated via the process automation. The next thing I want to just touch on is if I go back to my dashboard, I want to tie this in because some cases you do want to use the UI, you do want to interact with the product. In other cases, you want it just to be automated. So again, I've 10 devices in my inventory, 6 are known, 4 are unknown. I have all of these are routers and all of them are running 16.9.2. And so this is just an example of using one dashboard to surface this data up to you, then to, again, potentially do something with. So the next part of this, just really quickly, is I do want to show you the results that came in my mail. So let me show that really quickly. Hold on one second. So I did receive this email, and if I open up the CSV, I can see I received the report that was generated out, which has the device name, the management state. So this was a pre-built report that is in Data Explorer. It has all the information I wanted about those devices. And if I scroll to the right, it does even have the critical PCERT information. So if I'm keeping track of these counts, or maybe I want to be running a version that has 0 critical advisories, I could have that there as well. So again, just trying to run you through fairly quickly some use cases where we're moving from working within the UI to evolving it to process automation. So in the next use case here, we're going to look at what you would be doing next. And so what you'd be doing next, again, in our phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, is let's take a look at config, drift, and audit. And I want to look at I'm just going to show you really quickly in the UI an audit policy. So again, audits are, you're going to have many different flavors and versions, from standards-based. You can see we have many CIS-based audits in here. I created a pretty simple audit that is just representative of what I would call standard config. You're going to typically within your organization have standard configuration you want to audit for. So in this case, I'm just auditing some globals like NTP, DNS, username, SNMP banner. So if I look at these audit rules, again, you build these no code, and you can build in some complex logic. Let me resize a little bit here. So this is named NTP. I have I can do a simple rule or an if then. I'm doing an if then to say, if this is an iOS XE device, because I could have audits that are made up of rules for different operating systems, whatever I'm running my audit against. In this case, I'm auditing, and I'm just auditing that NTP is configured, right? So this is using regex because I'm not specifying what the NTP server is. I may have different regions and point to different NTP servers, so that's why the case is there. So let's go down to rule number 2. Rule number 2, I'm auditing for DNS. So in this case, I have a very explicit DNS name server I'm pointing to. And then rule number 3, I am auditing for username configuration for 3 different usernames of admin, operator, and the username Cisco. And 4 here, we're auditing for SNMP, and you can see I have some very specific SNMP community configuration. So again, you can use regex or you can use variables. There's all kinds of advanced things you can do. You can even do, again, advanced logic where it's if then, like if BGP is configured or if it has this line card, or there's all kinds of if then you can layer in when needed. Rule number 5 here is just checking for the banner. So you understand, in the underlying app, which is config drift and audit, I have an audit policy. Now let's navigate back to Network RPA in the workflow library, and I want to execute a company policy audit and report. So again, moving to process automation, I'm going to go ahead and go back into edit this workflow. So again, I'm filtering the targets for the devices I want to hit. These I'm filtering by something in the name, again, LAX. I'm now running an audit policy, and in my run audit policy task, I'm naming that Cisco standard audit. So this is the audit that will run. Now I have a condition. If there are if audit violations equal 0, I'm proceeding on the good path. Otherwise, I'm just looping in a notification. This is where, again, we could trigger a provisioning, or we'll get into more of those types of activities. I could add a Slack message. I can open up a ServiceNow ticket. Any number of possibilities. And then we're getting down to sending a report, and we're going to send the config drift and audit report in CSV format. And again, so this is the kind of the beauty where the Network RPA maps really well with the underlying applications, is that you can begin to automate the entire process, and it's pretty lightweight building the most of your process, because all that capability is already there in the underlying apps. We're not giving you a pile of tiny little Lego bricks and asking you to assemble something really complex. Now, you layer in complexity as you get to your API integrations and your Snow integration and all those other things. Okay, so we have our workflow here. We're going to, whoops, sorry here, my Zoom video is in the way here. We'll go back to the workflow library, and so that is the initial, sorry, I want to run the company policy audit. So we're going to go ahead and run this. So we're going to execute this workflow, execute, and go to activity, and you're going to see it running. And one of the things you're going to notice here is it ran in 6 seconds. So if I look at this, what it did here, I think, well, how could it audit that so quickly? Well, the configurations are already in our database. So in this example, we don't have to go back and requery the devices. When we ran a previous step where we inventoried them, all of the configurations are in our database already. So that's actually quite powerful. So now we can go back into, we can go to dashboard, look at our dashboard library. And these are just some example dashboards to see how we visualize information. If I dive into this, so I had 3 audits, so I had some audit violations here, and I can see that in this system previously there were other audits run. So some have run with some previous audits have run with issues and errors. So let's jump into config drift and audit the app, and just go into my audit policies. And as I double click on this particular audit result, 6 total devices and all passed. So I don't have any audit violations. So I'm in a good state here. So once again, I will just show you that the email I received contained the report, the config drift and audit report. And as I scroll over, my let's see here, last audit status was passed. So audits are an ongoing activity you're going to want to be doing. You don't necessarily want to have to babysit and run these manually. Anything you can build into a process, have it generate out your results, have it notify you or involve you when there's failures or issues, send you an email or open a ticket, however you want to be notified. But you can have this set up where you're auditing daily. You know, you can this can be scheduled, and then you can have your report history of all your audits. For the last quick demo, we're going to go into the third phase in this case, where we're going to be implementing configuration standards. So to implement configuration standards, I'm going to navigate into our config model editor in the node view here. And what you're going to see in the config model editor is I have my list of devices, and right now I have no policies tied to them. So right now we're not automating anything. And we're going to again be automating this through a process, but I just want to quickly show you. I'm going to click on this particular router here, spoke to, and I'm going to tie a policy to it. And you can see what this looks like here. So as I tie a pre-built policy to it, and I bring up the visualization of it. So I bring up the visualization of it. And here you can see here, this is a representation of our data modeling, where this is my device. This is what we call an assembly. An assembly is like a shopping cart of all the features that we're automating. And in this case, we're automating banner and DNS and NTP and SNMP and syslog and username. You can see these align with what we're automating or auditing, because if we get an audit violation, we can remediate because we are automating the configuration policy of these given configuration elements. And so this is kind of a modular templating you see here. We don't really have time to go deep into config modeling, but let's jump into Network RPA and go into our workflow library, because we're kind of fast forwarding doing things manually in the UI to what a policy automation looks like. So if I look at standard config policy, I'm going to go ahead and edit this workflow again. And what do I want to do? I want to filter, I want to audit. And if if I have audit violations equals 0, I'm going to notify and I'm good to go here. So this is actually a remediation workflow, where if I have violations, I'm going to go ahead and so let me do something kind of cool here on the fly, which is, let me go back to my workflow library. And the standard config policy, what we're going to do is clone this workflow, and I will leave it a -1 like that, clone. And in this particular workflow, what I'm going to do is, because I don't really want to run a remediation use case, I will remove that. And I was thinking it would be fast to clone and stuff like that, but let's go ahead and just, we're going to remove the if then too. So this is going to blow away all that stuff. So I'm back to filter my targets. All I want to do here is I want to associate assemblies with the nodes. What that means is tie a policy. For my node type of iOS router, I'm going to assign the policy example configs. So this is the global config example. So I'm applying that policy, and then I am going to provision that policy. So again, again, you could search here, or you could search the tasks here. I'm going to be provisioning. And then just for the complete sake, I will go ahead and drop in an email task and say, I'm going to send it to myself here. Other recipient, put in my email, workflow ran, And then all right, so I have my notification here. So this is really more like, assign the policy and then provision the policy. And again, this might be a one-time thing where you're doing it a one-time, but then you may tie it to, I want to get it back to that policy and that more of a remediation use case if I had an audit violation. So now I'm good with this. I'm going to save this workflow. And I'm going to validate the workflow, and I'm going to run the workflow. So in my activity, this one is going to take a little bit of time to run, just in the fact that we're executing and provisioning on all of those devices. So again, that gives us a little bit of time to just recap here what we've done, in that the notion around accelerating hyperautomation is, how do you build automation faster? That's kind of the no-code approach. How do you iterate faster, right? Meaning you have use case number one, then use case number two. How do you begin to take those things, all of those operation procedures, if it's provisioning, if it's configuration, if it's auditing, if it's move, add, change? You want to begin to really understand how those things execute from a manual standpoint. Well, when I say manual, within this product, and then you evolve them to these fully canned, repeatable processes. Anytime you can fit something into a process automation, it's going to be done the same way and the right way every time. Then you can start to build and layer in more complexity. Maybe you want more state assessment. Maybe you want more reporting and notification. Maybe you want more third-party integration. You can continue to kind of evolve the complexity, but getting started fast and accomplishing goals, like we're helping customers accomplish M&A faster. We're helping a lot of organizations remain compliant, both with internal reviews and standards as well as external compliance. So that's really the key to it. And while this workflow is running, again, you can look at the log, which is your high-level log. When you're doing a lot of variable management, all that variable management details, the data structures will be available in your detailed log here. And then again, you have I like the task view because I can see exactly what it's on. And then you can drill down into your target view. So again, you have that level of detail to drill in and view. And then in Network RPA, the logging updates as the task completes. You don't see it at real time as much in these devices here. So you do see, if I navigate back over to Config Model Editor, you will see the real-time logs and status. So if I just take a look over here and we go to our all node view here, let me close out this window. As provisioning is taking place, you'll see it, actually it finished. You would see your real-time view here and you can drill into the logs, but it did finish incomplete. So if I go back to my workflow activity, I see, again, 2 minutes, 20 seconds, it implemented the standard configuration. And as I just showed you in the app of config modeling, all of those configured properly and now are managed with the configuration. So I want to thank you again today for watching this ONUG open session, or whenever you're consuming this recording. Hopefully you get to see how Gluware can help you accelerate across many areas. And we're really just scratching the surface with this. But I wanted to show you how kind of out of the gate, within 30, 40 minutes, we can actually automate inventory, audit, config management. We're accomplishing a lot in a short period of time. So if you're interested, please reach out to us through gluware.com. You can request a demo. We'd love to hear your requirements and help fulfill that. You can also take the test drive, where you get access to an environment very similar to what I was showing you, and you can kick the tires yourself. So with that, again, thank you very much, and hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.